Hello, my dear friend, brother
Hello
Ben.
there.
Thank
Hello there, dear
you.
Faith. Good to see you again.
A lot of people that I speak to have had some kind of trauma in their life, and recognize the benefits or have heard of the benefits of meditation practice, mindfulness, concentrating on the breath, looking within, calming themselves down. I certainly can relate to that because I've had a few traumatic experiences, and I certainly know that when I do take that time for myself, that mindful moment just to calm and ground and resettle, it does give me that empowerment to help me to deal with the trauma. So I wanted to pick your brains today on your experience or your knowledge or anything that you could share to help people on how could mindfulness help people deal with past traumas.
And of the three things that you offered there, one is, my experience and what I can share, and what I thought about it. I thought sharing would be the safer option for this one. Not that I can't do the other two. It's just, I think it's a safer thing because it's a sensitive topic and it affects a great range of people. Right, so what I thought I'd do for this one, a little bit different, is to take this from a medical article. It's from a publication called Medical News Today. And it's an article about defining trauma, first of all, because, people might make assumptions and then define the symptoms and the kind of causes, and then go into some of the more relevant ones like PTSD, post-trauma, and childhood trauma, and then look at the treatments and where mindfulness fits in. It's very tempting that mindfulness becomes a panacea, a kind of fix-all, and it isn't. And on that note, many mindfulness practices, when they are made intensively, you can be practicing up to sort of 14, 16, 18 hours a day. Wow. Then you can also risk dissociation. So, which is also an aspect of trauma, which is becoming dissociated from the body temporarily or psychologically. So I want to also talk about that mindfulness is used in conjunction with other things, some of which are just basic, like human connection, talking with friends, healthy diet and sleep. But I'll come to that about the treatment side of things. But first of all, I thought it'd be good to define what we're talking about, rather than assume people are on the same page. So the Medical News Today, it's solid. It's really very, very well researched. I had a look at the research article that it was based upon, and it had 175 markers. So there's a peer-reviewed official research papers where when someone has done a test, it's gone through the proper channels. It means that it's been scientifically verified. So if they've taken 17 children from an earthquake zone, and then they've tested them and they've used, mindfulness-based stress reduction on them, then they've tested them afterwards biochemically and said, yes, look, their chemical levels are the adrenaline is sort of way down, all that, those kind of testings. Or if they're taking post-war veterans and they're testing them for post-trauma, or female, a group of 18 females that had childhood sex abuse or something, then the testing is verified. So it's not, sometimes you get woolly, vague claims. You sometimes get gurus who will do that, or they'll make very vague, spiritual claims, and they can just be false as well, or misleading. Or they can just be making them deliberately false and fake because they're sort of seductive, and then they will profit from gullible people. Right. So this article was medically reviewed as well by Timothy Legg. He's a PhD, CRNP, but it was written by Jane Leonard in June the 3rd, 2020. So it's a recent one. So there's talking about psychological trauma, which is a response to an event that a person finds highly stressful. And these examples can include a war zone, a natural disaster, or an accident. and it can cause a wide range of physical and emotional symptoms. And not everyone has after trauma. Sometimes it's just instant and then it gets resolved straight away, but not always. And but have a look at some of the long-term effect ones too. But the treatments are meant not just to also treat the symptoms, also that those are some of the ways of treating, but are usually aimed at the root causes of the trauma, and then to find constructive ways to manage them. So we're going to have a look at various types of trauma, and then trauma symptoms, and then the available treatment options. So these three things. So first of all, like, what is trauma? It can be described as an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, like a car accident, I mean, or a falling house, rape, or something like that, or a natural disaster. And a person may have this becoming repeated later on, or a response to a similar situation, or a situation that's perceived as to be similar, or even if there's an object that reminds a person of that scene, and then they go into a reaction. It's basically when the perception is the person themselves is in a physically or emotionally threatening or harmful situation. So it's a physiological and psychological emotional response. And then a traumatized person can feel a range of emotions both immediately after the event and in the long term. So even when it's something that's happened in childhood, and they can be well into adulthood when it's recurring. So they may feel overwhelmed and unable to cope, helpless, shocked, and have difficulty processing their experience. And it can have various kinds of physical symptoms as well. So the long-term effects as well. And if they don't decrease in severity, and that's the time to bring in people who can work with that, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So there are several types of trauma. So first is acute trauma, and this results from a single stressful or dangerous event, just one time. And then chronic trauma, and that results from repeated and prolonged exposure to highly stressful events. So an example might include a case of sort of child abuse, when you've got repeated events happening, bullying. So if someone's in school or college or near a gang or so on, or domestic violence. And then the third kind, so that's acute trauma, one time, chronic trauma, where it's repeating and doesn't look like it's going to change. Complex trauma, and this results from exposure to multiple traumatic events. So those can even be small and minor, but the effect of them is over a long time, and that creates that complex trauma. Then there's another type called secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. This is another form of trauma. And with this kind of trauma, a person develops trauma symptoms from close contact with someone who has experienced a traumatic event. So, for example, if your sibling is being bullied by a parent, for example, then the sibling can be experiencing all kinds of responses, but they're not directly getting it. So yeah, family members or mental health professionals as well, people like that, nurses and also sort of therapists can be experiencing vicarious trauma, and they often mirror PTSD. So if they're dealing with people who are describing shocking situations, of cruelty and so on, so they can likely get affected by that. Yeah. Okay. So then the symptoms, how does that actually manifest, physically, emotionally, and psychologically? They can range from mild to severe. They can have many factors, but many factors determine how a traumatic event comes up. So one is their personal characteristics, the person, how they personally are. And then if there's any other sort of mental health conditions as well. You can anticipate what those might be, such as low self-confidence, low self-esteem, or maybe something like schizophrenia or other complicated conditions like that. And then the type of and characteristics of the event and the background. So what's going on there It could be a tsunami, or it could be a plane crash, or it could be a motorway pileup, and it's a policewoman or something.
Yeah.
And then their background and their approach to handling emotions. So it depends how resilient they are and their emotional coping skills already, and how prone they are to projection, and or how fragile they are as a person. All.
Yeah.
So then the way the people will respond to trauma, these are the emotional and the psychological responses that can show that a person has experienced trauma. So they may include denial, just absolutely nothing happened at all, just that type of defense. Anger, fear, sadness, shame, confusion, anxiety, depression, numbness, guilt, hopelessness, irritability, and difficulty concentrating. So I think we also covered some of these. We were talking about complex post-trauma with people in the vicinity of narcissistic people, for example.
Yeah.
But so these can be the initial things that happen, and then obviously you can get fallout from that, where people are trying to numb these conditions. So, with porn or alcohol or something like that, or gambling or so on. So then emotional outbursts are common, and people finding it difficult to cope with how they feel, or they withdraw from others altogether. But again, these aren't categorical things. It's not, if you have someone who has a withdrawing from others, it might be another reason. They might just want to become a lighthouse keeper or something. It's not itself a sign that someone has it. It just maybe, together with the other symptoms, indicate it. But it's also for someone also to reflect on their own experience. Flashbacks is another one, where a person relives the traumatic event in their mind, and are common as something like nightmares. So, for example, people returning from war zones who will sort of suddenly, be woken up by their mother and race out and grab them by the throat or something. So flashbacks in that kind of sense, I suppose. Physical responses: headaches, digestive symptoms, fatigue, racing heart, sweating and feeling jumpy. Hyperarousal is another one, when someone feels as though they're in constant state of alertness, or if something's always about to happen that's dangerous, so they have to be hypervigilant. We talked about this with some forms of NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, which is that walking on eggshells. You're always hyper alert, and this can also give sleep disorders. So someone's always on high alert. They may go on to have other mental health issues, such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse problems, I was saying, which are sort of secondary to try to cope with those other symptoms. For particularly things like shame, I've counseled people for porn addiction, where actually behind it was the responses to shame. And often the shame came from bullying from father and brother in the house, but they grew up with a very low self-esteem, and so you get these sort of cycles. So about these experiences and the statistics and the frequency, 60 to 75% of people in North America will have experienced traumatic event at some point.
Wow.
And the Mind charity in the United Kingdom lists the following as potential causes of trauma: bullying, harassment, physical, psychological, or sexual abuse, sexual assault, right? For example, traffic collisions, childbirth itself can be traumatic, life-threatening illnesses, the sudden loss of a loved one, being attacked, being kidnapped, acts of terrorism, natural disasters, and war. So these can be isolated or repeated or ongoing events. And a
Mhm.
person can also experience trauma after witnessing something traumatic happening to someone else. And people have different reactions to traumatic events. For example, those who live through the same natural disaster can respond very differently despite experiencing the same event. PTSD develops when the symptoms of trauma persist or get worse in the weeks or months after the stressful event. And
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress disorder is distressing, and it interferes with person's daily life and relationships. A little caveat or sort of side note here is that when we're talking about meditation, just to jump ahead a little bit, the danger in any form of self-help or other help is the danger of re-traumatization, is that the guide in whatever form that is, meditation teacher or companion or physiotherapist, psychotherapist, they can also, maybe they're not familiar with how to handle trauma. They're not, so you have trauma-informed meditation teachers who understand it and they are trained, and others who just aren't, but they've elected themselves to be meditation teachers. So if during a meditation, retreat, someone starts presenting, they may mishandle them, or they may even re-traumatize them. So the event comes out, and it can even be happening in a similar situation.
Yeah.
So you can have an extremely aggressive or bossy meditation center manager who has a go at someone, and at that time, that person is already experiencing surfacing sort of father issues or something, or authority, some sort of trauma. So this can be re-trauma.
Yeah.
Or amplifying or even making it worse.
Sure.
So PTSD is distressing and it interferes with a person's daily life and relationships. And symptoms include severe anxiety, flashbacks, persistent memories of the event. Another symptom of PTSD is avoidance behaviors. So if a person tries to avoid thinking about the traumatic event or visiting the place where it occurred or avoiding its triggers, so it can be a sign of PTSD, and it may last for years, although treatment can help people to manage the symptoms and generally improve their quality of life. Whether it can actually remove it totally is another thing.
Yeah, I relate to that.
Yeah, I think we all do a little bit. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I hear that though. Yeah. So risk factors for developing it can be previous trauma, for example, physical pain or injury, so re-damaging in a similar way. Also, having little support after the trauma. It's very important what happens immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Dealing with other stresses at the same time, such as financial difficulties or so on. So you might get sort of attacked and robbed, lose all your money, and then you've got an extra problem. You've got two problems. Previous anxiety or depression. So you might already have anxieties or depressions, and then there's a rape. So then you're dealing with the post-trauma, the shame, and then the previous anxiety and depression that was already there. So it's trauma on trauma on trauma. Most people, will have a prevalence of PTSD. It is about 7%, 6.8% in the US, for example. So that's an indication of the prevalence, and that's still that's a very large chunk of people. As a percentage. Childhood trauma. So research indicates that children are especially vulnerable to trauma because their brains are still developing, so that the impression goes much deeper. And children experience a heightened state of stress during terrible events, and their bodies release hormones related to stress and fear much easier than adults will do, which is also yeah. I mean, it's the abandonment fear. Parents might leave a child in a car where they go off and do some shopping and come back, so they may experience abandonment anxiety or something, or also just the duration of their life. What's to them is half their life is much shorter span of time, or relativity compared to adults.
Sure.
So this type of developmental trauma can disrupt normal brain development as well. So as a result, trauma, especially ongoing trauma, so we're talking about bullying or so on, or sexual abuse or something in build ongoing, can significantly affect a child's long-term emotional development, mental health, physical health, and behavior. And the sense of fear and helplessness that a child receives may persist into adulthood because it gets hardwired in. Even though there's neuroplasticity that can be still worked with also with more mindfulness later on.
Right.
But it leaves the person at a significantly higher risk for the effects of future trauma. So we'll talk a bit about treatments, which is where mindfulness can fit in, amongst other things. As I say, it's not a universal fix-all at all. And it also shouldn't be treated like that by meditation center, sort of managers and so on. They shouldn't throw everyone into a course, for example. They should vet people quite carefully and be aware of the risks and look for watch out for signs of things. So treatment, several treatments can help people with trauma to cope with their symptoms and improve their life quality, which is what we can claim.
Yeah.
Therapy is a first-line treatment of trauma, and ideally an individual will work with a trauma-informed or trauma-focused therapist. Types of therapy a person with trauma could benefit from may include cognitive behavioral therapy. So we know that with the patterns of thinking, it's all my fault. Someone's in an earthquake zone and no, it was all my fault. It wasn't their fault. It can just be thinking can be causing a lot of effects. But cognitive behavioral therapy helps people to change their thought patterns in order to influence their behaviors and emotions. And evidence supports CBT as one of the most effective approaches to PTSD, for example. I spend a lot of today also researching on generally on the internet, mindfulness therapy, trauma, and just searching and seeing what's out there. There's a great deal more that's coming up all the time. People specializing in this, not only therapists and they will do CBT, but mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy is one, for example. Many of the mindfulness-based practices are getting, because that's quite different. If you're working only on this thought, that's quite different than being distant from your thoughts and being able to sort of observe them. Cognitive behaviors are interfering with thinking and inserting different thoughts, which is also a part of classical mindfulness practice, actually, which is not the way it's always used, for example, in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is more, we'll come to that. One of the other ones, and I learned about this when I was looking for about therapists who do complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is often used in recovering people from families where there's been abuse. EMDR is often being promoted by people who say this is one of the ones that really helps because it deals with memories. That is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So you have two people facing each other, and the therapist will be moving their hands like this, and the eyes of the person are moving it while they are recounting about a specific incident, and this helps to reprocess it. So eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. So that's another common trauma therapy. So during EMDR, individuals briefly relive specific traumatic experiences while the therapist directs their eye movements. And EMDR aims to help people process and integrate traumatic memories. And then there's been several randomized controlled trials that have demonstrated that EMDR is an effective treatment for PTSD. So going to be used with the military, for example, those kind of things, and extended on into, the domestic market. So then there's somatic therapies, because so far we've been talking about kind of mind down, like the brain, talking to the brain, and then that will release and affect the body. So there are
Yes.
somatic therapies. So soma, the body-based ones. Some therapists use somatic or body-based techniques to help the mind and the body process trauma. A review of the literature in the Psychotherapy and Counselling Journal of Australia found that body-based therapies could help a range of people. And these therapies include somatic experiencing. This approach involves a therapist helping a person to relive traumatic memories in a safe space.
Okay.
So this is very important. A friend of mine, Jo Chan, she's in Hong Kong. I know she's been a yoga teacher, and she was also working with refugees from Syria who had fled during all the war over to Europe, Greece, and France. But when she came back, I was saying, well, you may have got stress disorder from that, and she said, no, I'm already on it. I'm working with somatic experiencing. I was like, what's that? And she said that places, for example, some of the leading meditation centers in America, it's a basic pre-requirement of the teachers that they know somatic experiencing so that they can recognize and handle someone going through traumatic memories in a safe space. And that's also quite different to, for example, I talked about Sam Vaknin. He talks about cold therapy, which is deliberately re-traumatizing someone in a cold, unfriendly environment, because his belief is that that's the suitable way to elicit it. At that point, I stood back and thought, I'm not sure about that. I would have to investigate that a little bit further before advocating on it in whatsoever. I can imagine that could be setting up a sort of awful camp for scaring people or something.
Yes.
How would you ever know if it's working or not? So back to the treatment. So somatic experiencing, warmly recommended, apparently. Sensory motor psychotherapy. So this type of therapy combines psychotherapy with body-based techniques to turn traumatic memories into sources of strength. So that's not only just talking, tell me about your childhood, not talking only about the interpersonal and the memories of the personalities. It's dealing right there and then with the body-based techniques. You've been teaching yoga, so you'll be more aware of body-based techniques and massage as well. Then.
Yeah.
Acupoint stimulation. Yeah, acupressure.
Yeah.
Acupoint stimulation, this involves a practitioner applying pressure to specific points on the body, which induces a state of relaxation. So how much that is validated? Well, this comes from peer-reviewed literature, so I won't even question it. I have seen questions about some similar things, such as Chinese meridians or so on, whether they are valid or not. But presumably there are specific points on the body which can do that, like with good massage. Touch therapies is another one, including Reiki or healing touch and therapeutic touch therapy. So at present, there is not as much evidence to prove the effectiveness of somatic therapies as there is for CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and EDMR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And researchers know that more data on these methods will help to determine how they work. And then there's the medications. Medications alone cannot cure trauma or PTSD, but it can help a person manage symptoms such as anxiety, depression, sleep disturbances temporarily. So a person should talk to their doctor about those options. I'm not really going to go into them. I'm not qualified. I'm not a doctor or of any kind. So that's the medical news today. And they go on to talk about, so what we're going to talk about with mindfulness, because I know time is getting on. Self-care. So this is just straightforward practicing self-care, which can help individuals cope with emotional, the psychological, the physical symptoms of trauma. And these might include things, a lot of common sense things. So exercise within reason, middle way, moderate exercise, not extreme. Trauma can activate the body's fight or flight response, a lot of adrenaline. So exercise may help mitigate some of these effects and also temporarily give you power to change your brain chemistry. If you've gone into panic, just exercise can change the brain chemistry. And research suggests that aerobic exercise may be an effective therapy for people with PTSD. So I get the Jane Fonda workout on there, the aerobics in front of the television.
Leg warmers, yeah.
Yeah, shake that tush. So individuals, did I say? Individuals can aim to exercise for at least 30 minutes a day on most days of the week. There you go. And mindfulness.
Yay.
Mindfulness breathing. As I say, it's not a catch-all 100%. It's not always suitable.
No.
Mindfulness breathing, or mindfulness based on breathing. So this is actually, I was already listening to someone this afternoon who was talking about that you have to be very careful about this, because sometimes if the trauma is based on breathing, so therefore you've got to be very careful in that case. It might not be. It might be that photographing, and there's someone called David Trevelyan. Okay, you know, like I would recommend checking him out. He's specializing in trauma-informed meditation teaching. I did notice he was a bit political. He didn't make any secret of it. He really wanted to involve, you know, Black Lives Matters and feminism and a lot of sort of social activism as well. Whereas I was hoping it was going to be someone who kept this discreet, you know, and only focused on this topic. He involves it. So that's to be taken into account with some people like him. But trauma-informed meditation teachers is an example of one. But he was saying, you know, if the breathing is the tract, you know, is where the trauma happened. If someone was raped while being throat, or they were drowning with water, many things like that, maybe involved blue sniffing or something. It's not necessarily going to be the, you know, the best focus, and it's not the only one. But mindfulness breathing and other mindfulness-based exercises. So you can use mindfulness all over the body. Actually, it doesn't only have to be on the body. It can be on the feelings and on the mind states and on the thoughts as well. So the difference is that it's focused in the present. So psychotherapy, talking therapy, psychodynamic, on the couch therapy, tell me about your childhood. See, that's focusing on the past and on the problems and on the interpersonal relations and the memories. So it's on the past. Life coaching is also not regulated. So everyone can become a life coach after a weekend or 3 hours of training. They're a certified life coach. Somebody just said they are. Yeah, so there's that problem. But that doesn't mean to say at all that, you know, there aren't any good ones. They very may well be. Is that's usually about planning and goals and targets and having sort of a map of your future to aim for and to go for. So therefore it's future based. So here we've got two polar axes about the time aspect, whereas mindfulness will almost always be focused in the present. The more that it's body based, Kaya Nupassana is the Theravada name for that. Or mindfulness, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, where the first foundation is the mindfulness of the body. Satipatthana is called, anyway, Vipassana, it's got different names. That's focusing in the present. And you get, as you stop drifting off or being able to be mindful of thoughts that take you off into who I will be, who I was, or what happened in the past, you're going to be able to get more into the present. So mindfulness-based exercises can ground people in the present, and that can help them stop from reliving the traumatic event. So there are various ways that can do that, like mindfulness of memories. So it's very different between just having a memory and going spinning off into it. Oh yeah, hey, I wonder if he was behaving like this because he's just like my friend at school. He was just like that other gang who went, so you can go spinning off into memories. But with mindfulness, you can get more ability to be able to observe those phenomena as if you're on a bus and they are events that are happening the other side of the window, and you can just kind of, oh, look at there's some events going past. A little bit more of that. But you just got that platform of difference that you can observe it. You're not just instantly enmeshed in the thoughts. You've just got this platform of mindfulness where you can go, oh yeah, I can hear those voices, I can hear the sound, I can see the memory, and I can see that's a memory, for example. So that can help to break the cycle, which is one of the aims of classical mindfulness, is breaking these cycles that cause suffering. That's classically called samsara. So, yeah, studies have suggested that mindfulness-based treatments are a very promising intervention for post-traumatic stress disorder. So as I say, those are not studies to be taken lightly. They are very thoroughly done, involving many, many people in them who are genuinely suffering from post-traumatic stress. And the measurements are very accurately cross-checked. So that's not to be taken lightly. And it's very difficult to get that kind of credibility and recognition in such a journal. And that's whether it's alone or in conjunction with other treatments. So both is a good thing. You know, you could be having cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness practice, massage, all together or in sequence, and you know, skillful combinations. And so we're back down to, again, like self-care, you know, your life choices that will help. So another one is connection with others, with other people, and animals as well, actually. But withdrawal from others is a common symptom of trauma. However, connecting with friends, connecting with family can be important, depending, depending where the source of the original trauma is, obviously, but connecting. And according to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, staying in contact with people can help to prevent trauma from becoming post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's not necessary to talk about the trauma with other people if it's too difficult. And actually that can be frustrating anyway. If you're having a specific complication and you try talking with friends and they just don't get you, or they're not helpful, get over it. Yeah. You're just imagining it or whatever. Simply engaging with others can improve mood and well-being. It's just the engagement. It doesn't have to be focused on a problem. Sure. Some people feel a benefit from disclosing the trauma with other people they trust, or you can also join support groups, specific ones. I noticed you joined one. That's a very good thing, because the people on there will almost certainly be very helpful, and they can relate to the problem they've had themselves. If it was a specific, like Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're dealing with alcoholic parents or something. A balanced lifestyle. So a person with trauma may find it difficult to relax, difficult to sleep well, but however, sleep, relaxation, and diet all play a role in mental health, even though they're physical. And if possible, the person should try to sleep 7 to 9 hours a night, eat a balanced diet, avoid alcohol, avoid drugs, relieve stress with mindful or enjoyable activities, and then support. So if necessary, people can ask for support from others, and this includes talking to trusted loved ones or joining a support group for trauma survivors. And the point to seek help is when people who are experiencing persistent or severe symptoms of trauma should seek help from a mental health professional. And I think that should be emphasized. When I was talking with a life coach person, I was en route to lining up a couple of therapy sessions, and they interrupted. I said, no, it's not therapy, it's life coaching. And I went, just a minute, I was trying to check what's the difference between life coaching and therapy and counseling. And I listened to one by Dr. Todd Grande, and it was basically a video entitled, "Is Life Coaching a Scam?" And he was pointing out that someone could have like 3 hours training and they're certified.
Yeah.
That's it. So I went back to them. I said, how long was your training? And they said 6 weeks. So I was like, yeah, I don't think that's really, I'd like to go, sorry. So I don't know how to politely put this. But
back in a few years,
and they were okay. They said, yeah, I understand. They were someone who also works with mental health, as a professional, but they might also, as a professional mental health person, they might be someone who pushes the wheelchairs around. Doesn't necessarily mean they're really qualified to deal with quite complicated situations.
Yeah.
So it's especially important to seek help if the trauma symptoms interfere with daily functioning or relationships with others. And even those with mild symptoms can feel better once they talk to someone and start actually working on it.
Yeah. So
that's my offering from today. That comes from the Medical News Today. And so I'm very grateful for the people who wrote that article. And it's been very useful. That was written by Jane Leonard, and it was medically reviewed by Timothy J. Legg, PhD. And I personally had a look at the reference for all of the research material, which went deep into MBSR, checking out mindfulness-based stress reduction, developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And that was developed within a hospital setting. So it went under a lot of scrutinization and very verified. So I think I feel happy about being able to deliver that on, even though he is a PhD, I'm not whatsoever, and I'm not claiming to be a certified even therapist or anything like that. So it's only simply a reading out of an article to help people who may have questions and have found their way to this video upload. And it's certainly something that I'm looking into and looking forward to learning more about as much as I'd like to claim on it.
Absolutely. But there was a lot there already, and a lot of it was new for me, stuff that I had never heard of before. So that's food for thought to investigate. But also, there was a lot there that reconfirmed what I'm already thinking and feeling, and what other people have already shared that they're practicing as well, in terms of like the self-care, which is huge. And then putting into perspective like where mindfulness is, like it's in the present, and the benefits of that, and the different types of therapies that might be working for somebody at a particular time, and then maybe they may need to adapt to another form when they're ready. So maybe they need that kind of, I need to stay in the past to really get to the roots and then deal with it. But then after I've had enough of that, maybe I need to just center into the present and then start projecting to where I'm heading into the future.
And also to be getting guidance, not just sort of, well, I feel like this and I feel like too much. I mean, there is, getting to trust your intuition, but there is also getting experienced, specialized advice about that. Absolutely. Or dealing with and looking for therapists that have integrated therapies, or that they know how to do several, or it's a center that, has that combined, they can handle it in combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And also your point to really find a therapist or therapists that are really well studied and well practiced.
There is a point. I mean, I was talking with a South African lady about this, and she said that one of her first therapists was highly qualified. She's she'd been accumulating degrees and, PhD and so on. And she was very damaging. She was giving this little caveat, just a little warning that just because someone is qualified, that's really not enough to go on. It's part of the verification process that they have gone through academic rigor, because it's difficult to get a counseling licensure. Certainly in the States, it's not easy, but it does require a certain amount of discipline and study. But again, it's not a guarantee in itself. You should still be very careful. And the other thing that people keep saying, is get personal verbal recommendation. Even that, it's something. It's a big mixture. It's quite a difficult field to find. But I think even the discrimination that you're developing by looking and learning to look carefully, it's like, somebody doesn't start off knowing how to do shopping.
Yeah.
But they learn. And they make mistakes, so but just don't make too many big, expensive mistakes, either the expense psychologically to yourself or, financially as well, is be very cautious. And I'd say that also, having checked out some of the e-counseling new systems, because you're vulnerable, you're eager, and you've already said I'm damaged and vulnerable by saying, yes, I need therapy. So there, I think there's a fair amount of scamming and predatory stuff out there. I signed up for something, I won't give the name of it because I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was a scam. It had a very legit and very slick website, and they said, have 3 days free. Choose any of our counselors, or we'll select a counselor for you. Have 3 days sort of counseling for free. I was like, what can go wrong, So just, to log on and activate. So I'll send you an email, put your credit card in here, details in here, and then you can cancel at any time. You just go to your page. I was like, hey, what can go wrong? Well, fine. So during that 3 days, there was no place to cancel. I was going, cancel. They haven't sent me an email. Or they did send me, one counselor. And I think about day 2, I went onto a site, query, and I put their name in, and sure enough, there were like 19 complaints. And many of them had said, well, I was sent this counselor, and it's like the same one I got sent. It's like, so it looked like there's one counselor behind it all, just this, one person in this one town. And they just, and because everyone, once your 3 days is finished, that you haven't managed to cancel, and you haven't had anything, it will automatically trigger your first monthly payment. Even if they just keep combing that in, it's a lot of money, so watch out, just be careful. And like I say, I think this act of developing the discrimination, just to double check, just to cross refer, to find a good reference. I like listening to Todd Grande, and I trust his legitimacy. For example, my personal, that's just my personal opinion. He's quite a good reference.
Yeah.
Finding a therapist is just not easy. Much of therapy has been developed, and there are big networks, foremost in America. So often when it will say, find a therapist near you, they'll say, enter your zip code. Like, I've got a zip code, I'm in the Philippines. So it's like, first of all, where are you? And we'll find the nearest one. Well, I'm not in America. It's a bit like the World Series. It's the World Series, but it's only got 2 American teams, so they can do it. So yeah, I think it will mature. It's the early days, and I'm very optimistic that we will be able to get this together. And it's out there. Like I say, if you just look on YouTube under trauma mindfulness therapy, you see a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to be going for a few days and watching the videos, and then you can see, here's an eye movement desensitization, little clip, showing it in practice, and here's the 2 people who run it, introducing themselves. You can get a gist. Are they legit or not? Are they an actually qualified doctor? And then you can cross-refer them, and just do your cross-referencing on who it is you're dealing with, I think, and get to know them a bit before you get to know them.
Get to know them.
Because it will be re-traumatizing. This is what I found out when I discovered this one looked like a bit of a scam, and I had to freeze my credit card and call up my bank and all this stuff. Is that's traumatic. You're going in with full open heart trust. Hi everyone. So you get a shock, and it's angering and frustrating, and you feel abused. So it's a kind of re-trauma.
That's true. Absolutely. Very good advice. That was really amazing. There was so much there, and I'm wondering if maybe we can elaborate on some areas in the next call.
Yeah, as particularly I think if I can get more literature, and be sort of getting good literature to share, I think that's a better bet than just chip in. Especially I think if we have guests as well. I think if everybody just sort of chips in their thoughts, it can be a bit random as well. I think if it's like this, it can be focused and valuable, because like if somebody just wouldn't have thought necessarily to go, or who wants to read a thing? Often we don't read now, we watch YouTube. Like, so a lazy generation.
Right.
Or visual.
We just listen and watch.
It can be a nice way to have the information delivered, and then I'm learning.
That's it. We all learn together. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time already, because that takes time. And so lovely to see you, and thank you. And we look forward to seeing everybody next time. If anyone has questions, or if anyone has anything specific that they would like to discuss in a particular topic, then don't hold back. Let us know, and we will gladly. This is what it's about. It's about looking in and sharing.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
They always say that, don't they?
And then there's
I start saying that to people in real life now. If I talk to them in the street, like and subscribe. So, no, the comments will be really nice. Constructive, polite, reasonable comments, relevant comments are very welcome.
Absolutely. And any ideas. So thank you very much, everybody. We hope it helps, and pass it on to others that it could help as well. Thank you. See you on the next call, and bye.